we were going through. So it really became very isolating and very lonely. We found hope, we found answers and support through the Alagille Alliance in many ways. And keep in mind, this was back in 2007, 2008-ish. So if you think about Facebook, the internet, and social media, it was almost non-existent. So we did have this nice support group. I don't know if it was like a DOS-based kind of platform, but it was an old school platform. But we were able to really connect and garner some great information through the Alliance and the information that was put forth. We found hope. Oh, sorry. For example, this platform allowed us to discover GI doctors that were versed in Alagilles. And so what we started to do was actually reach out to some of the contacts that were part of, I guess at the time was called the Medical Advisory Board, to try to find out information about Alagilles. We connected with a lot of families, and some of the families that are still very active in the community. We found a lot of great information in helping us make decisions. And what I mean by that is making the decision to go NG2 versus G2 for our daughter because she was dealing with a lot of nutrition and malabsorption challenges very early on. And then it helped us get advice for very complex matters like dealing with insurance denials. And I know that we'll talk about that a little bit later today, but we went through something extremely challenging, very emotional all last year where our insurance denied our daughter who had been taking Peptamen Jr. through her G2 since 9 months of birth, and your insurance company, and we did have private insurance, kept denying us one after another when we would appeal. We had doctors involved. I even talked to lawyers. And if you guys know me, I'm very resourceful and I won't say no for an answer. So even though the insurance company denied us and would not fulfill her food, which is essentially 90% of her nutrition, I turned to the family, and I turned to the groups, and I turned to physicians that I had access to who basically gave me coupons, and families that had extra abundance of formula. She was literally taking everything, so she wasn't even in her normal standard of care because we didn't have access to her formula. Sorry. Sorry. I truly felt supported without judgment in this safe place that was built around the Alliance. Sorry, can I get a tissue? Sorry. I was trying to hold myself together and not break down, but as you know, this is a very personal story. So,
you're doing great.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry. Okay, so being on this journey has been a roller coaster ride of endless emotion, as you guys are seeing firsthand here. And there's this just constant worry cloud over you. So having to see someone you love so much suffer with a condition so rare, with no cure, but those of us who are planners, and I am like a planner. I like things very organized, and I'm very analytical, as I mentioned. So to live this world or live this life, it was a whirlwind operating in this constant gray area. So when we would ask questions about Alagille to better understand the syndrome, whether it was professionals, families, the advice of families that were going through what we were going through, you would get 4 different answers. And I know you families out there, you know what I mean and can understand, you will get 4 different answers. There's really no manual that could truly prepare you for facing this situation on a constant basis with this disease. And again, I know many of you in here can relate. So let me just take you back to the beginning and share her story. So from the moment she was born, we knew we'd be in for a roller coaster ride because Melania had the umbilical cord wrapped around her neck, not once, not twice, but 6 times when she came out fighting. So we knew she was going to be a fighter early on. She continued fighting for several days in the NICU for multiple health reasons, from being treated for jaundice. She had to be on a breathing tube, and I know there's a lot of things from a medical perspective that I can't even remember, but she was in the NICU for almost 2 weeks. Even when she was discharged from the hospital, I had no clue the journey that we would be in for. To be honest, I thought we were in the clear after we had been released from the hospital. I happened to be on our 1-month checkup and then run routine checkup, and our pediatrician had noticed that she wasn't thriving or showing signs of growth. I could tell from her pediatrician's face that things were not good. And what she later shared with me is that in her 20 years, she has never had a patient with Alagilles. So if you take that information and let that sink in, and I know a lot of us go through this on a day-to-day basis, when you have someone that sees thousands and thousands of patients in the pediatric space, and they tell you that they've never heard or even, well, I'm sure she's heard, but she's never treated a patient with Alagilles, that's not the words you want to hear as a new parent. So we were admitted shortly after that appointment to Sunrise Children's Hospital for a long stay due to this term that I got to know very well called failure to thrive. It was a term we heard often, very early on. It was during her admittance that we were learning something was off and not normal. This event changed everything in our lives. We saw different doctors, specialists coming into our hospital room. So as you can imagine, that experience is overwhelming, not for just a parent, but just as a new mom. I was in over my head in all these different medical terms and these tests that they wanted to do on her, the blood work that they wanted to draw. I mean, it was just overwhelming. And we were doing our best as new parents to hold it together and just to remain strong for our little child. After a ton of tests and doctor visits, we were told they needed to do a liver biopsy very soon. At the time, they wanted to determine if it was biliary atresia based on what they were initially seeing. Alagille had not come into the picture yet. It wasn't until after the liver biopsy that they started to point to Alagille syndrome. So fast forward 9 months later, we learned that she had a rare genetic liver disease called Alagille syndrome. Even when the biopsy was performed a few months prior to her GI, her GI could not pinpoint, her clinical GI could not pinpoint an official diagnosis. I kept hearing these words he would tell me. We suspect she has Alagille syndrome. For quite some time, I grew tired of hearing that. So what I did, this is when I really turned to the support group of the Alliance. I went in, I looked at all the different names or any names that I could find, that was close to me. And at the time we were living in Las Vegas. And again, we had moved quite a bit. And when I found Dr. Rosenthal was actually the doctor that officially gave her diagnosis, I found his email address. And so for those of you that often turn to the internet was my friend back in that time. So I found Dr. Rosenthal's email. I emailed him Melania's story, shared with him all the medical records, all the tests that she had gone through up to that point, set up a consultation. He acknowledged my email, which was great because usually when you reach someone high profile like that, sometimes you don't even get a response. So he acknowledged my email and asked us to come down and visit. From that point on, we met with him in San Francisco, and that's when it wasn't even a minute into the appointment, he walked in and he basically said, and for those of you that don't know Dr. Rosenthal in the room, he's a pretty straightforward guy. So he basically looked at us and said, I 100% with all the information you have given me, she has Alagille syndrome. And that's exactly how we found out our diagnosis. So, let's see here. Okay. So, after countless nights, with all the research and doing this stuff online with the support groups, we found out that diagnosis. So just to give you a little bit of background, so as we were going through our journey, we went through the list of characteristics of an Alagille's patients and just checked one, just kind of went through the list. So I'll just provide this in kind of bulletproof form. She had elevated bilirubin. She definitely had the jaundice coloring. She started to develop xanthomas. She was itching. Nutrition was a challenge. So pre-G-tube, she had also projectile vomiting. So that was a fun job as well. That was later corrected when we actually made the decision to get the G-tube. She also had the procedure, and is it fundoplication for those of you that are technical in the room? So she also had that done at the same time. So post G-tube, it had taken us a few years for her to even consider eating food. So I don't know what happened or if she was traumatized as a child or a baby, but after she had the G-tube, she did not want to take anything orally. So it was up to about 4 years, almost the first 4 years, everything was done 100% through the G-tube. The coloring of her teeth started to shift, so we started noticing a yellowish coloring on her teeth, and I was concerned about that. So we did see like a pediatric dentist to understand, like, why is this happening? Well, we learned that your teeth can be jaundiced too, and so that was also another aspect that we were also dealing with. She did not have the vertebrae issues. She did have the dominant facial characteristics of an Alagille's patient, and there was no eyesight issues for her. She's got perfect eyesight. So fast forward to our current state, and now that she's turning 12. Today, she still remains jaundiced. She still has the yellowish colors in her eyes. She's about 61 to 62 pounds. She does have xanthomas, which is our biggest challenge with her. She also continues to be G-tube fed, and I would say it's probably 80% G-tube, 20% getting food orally. And what shifted for us with her eating orally was her actually going to school. So when we started integrating her into pre-K and using services, and I think in Nevada it was called early intervention. So those are services that are offered through your state. When you have a child with a disability, they provided these wonderful services for us, and that's when we started to see things kind of shift for her, is when she was in that social setting amongst her peers. Let's see. She still deals with a lot, and I don't know if this has even been talked about or even researched, but something that we deal with is her teeth. We go to just a standard, dentist, and, right now they're just pulling teeth they're just pulling a ton of teeth out because she's dealing with a lot of crowding, and obviously her teeth are jaundiced, and it makes me a little hesitant because they want to push her through this whole, care where she's having to do, braces and retainers, and I'm just afraid of that procedure, to be honest with you, because I don't know if there's something else that's going to come from a procedure like that. So I would love any input from that standpoint. From a nutrition perspective, as I mentioned, she's still on G-tube. She takes Peptamen Junior 1.5, and she takes anywhere between 1 to 2 cans. She refuses to do anything orally when it comes to her formula. So any tips there are greatly appreciated. She is a picky eater, so when she does eat, these are the things that she enjoys eating. She loves pizza with ranch dressing. She loves pasta, ramen soups, cheese, strawberries with whipped cream, cereal with almond milk, turkey and cheese sandwiches, Cheetos, and the kicker is raw clams with lemon. And she can pound down 3 dozen in a sitting. So if anyone wants to run out and get her some clams for her birthday, she will greatly appreciate that. Drink-wise, she only enjoys extremely ice-cold water. So if you hand her a bottle of water, she's likely not going to drink it. She enjoys dessert-type drinks like Starbucks caramel frappuccinos with extra caramel drizzle and coconut milk boba. For those of you that know boba, kids love that stuff. Medication. So what is she on? She's on... Is it Ursidile or Okay, Ursidile, 2 capsules daily, and we do have to break that capsule up and administer it through her G-tube. She's on Mephitin, vitamin D, and she's on Atarax. Personality-wise, for those of you that, again, have been following her, she's truly full of life. Not this morning because she's been sleep-deprived and she hates me right now. But she lives a pretty normal childhood. Her teachers and her nurses at school always say, she's a social butterfly. And I never thought that she would actually be someone that would be social. I thought she was going to be very lonely, especially with dealing what she was dealing with. But come to find out, she's proven us all wrong, and she is a lively little girl. She enjoys singing, so she's been performing in front of people in her school since kindergarten. She loves arts and crafts. One of the things that we've done just to advocate for Alagilles and to fundraise in our community is we love kindness rocks. And for those of you that don't know what kindness rocks are, they're basically like river rocks, and people paint on them and put inspirational messages or pictures. And so we found really great hope in connecting not only us as families, but our community. And so I definitely enjoy doing those things in my community. And if you ever want to follow us, it's hashtag Rock Kindness for a Cure. All things involved, she loves her iPhone and iPad, so she's really tech savvy and loves to be in front of the camera. And as mentioned, she loves spreading kindness and helping others. We do a lot of community service, and I don't drag her along, I bring her along, just so she can see that, people all deal with different things. And so we really focus our attention on, serving the underserved in our community. And we also focus on a lot of different organizations in our community that focus on disability and inclusion. So that's a big part of, what we like to do. And the most beautiful thing about her is she can be placed in any situation and make the most out of it. I believe she was truly placed in our lives to teach us a lesson on resilience and strength. So as I close here today, again, I'm thankful today Melania is stable and she is thriving. Not much has changed in her routine clinically. While we cannot predict what her future holds, our warrior, I know, will continue to spread awareness. I know she will advocate, and I promise to always provide her the best and most fulfilling life possible. We all know raising a child with rare disease like Alagille forces us to all look at life a little differently. So for me, I really chose to shift my mindset because I was very much in a dark place, and I'm fine with admitting that. And I know kind of your mental state, whether it's for your child or even yourself as a parent. Again, it's very lonely, and I don't want to sugarcoat that our journey has been smooth sailing, because it hasn't, and it has taken me to some very dark places. So I did shift my mindset and really just focused on the positive. I devoted my energy to helping others and to be a voice in this chaotic world that we live in. Our lives as warrior parents never truly feel settled. We've moved for better health care, as mentioned. We've moved for drug trials and to be closer and to participate in studies and to be near the supportive family. In the end, chasing all these things always brings me back to one thing: the fight. The fight for a better life. The fight to never give up when all the odds are stacked against you. I know I'm speaking on behalf of many of you here by saying we've sacrificed a lot on our Alagille's journeys and will continue to do so for that better quality of life. So thank you, and my deepest appreciation does go out to the Alagille's Alliance, all the doctors, clinicians, pharmaceutical companies, research. I mean, the list goes on and on. There's a lot of you guys here in the room today. And of course, our warrior families that are here today. This is worth the investment. And again, this is our fourth one, so we've never looked back. Each day that goes by, I think of our community and how far we've come. Although life is far from what is defined as normal, I would not change anything with cards that I've been dealt. The journey through RARE has allowed me to see not the good, but the great. It's taught me the importance of advocating, and lastly, it truly allowed me to find a purpose in all of this. It's taught me to pull on strength I never knew possible. I hope to continue expanding on our story with Alagille's and wish to one day share the words, "Our warrior has a cure." Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. It is so good to hear the family stories. I know not too many of you in this room know Stephanie or Melania yet, but I can tell you Melania gets her fight from her mama. So thank you, Stephanie. Hannah, we're gonna have Hannah come up and tell her story. And again, she has Damien. So Hannah, if you want to come up, and I'm just gonna take one of these to my table.
Good morning. It is different once you're up here, huh? Woo! First, I want to say thank you. I came prepared. First, I want to say thank you to the Alagille Syndrome Alliance for literally everything that you do for this event, for always guiding and giving us support, and for this opportunity to share our story. My name is Hannah Craig, and I'm the mother of an amazing 8-year-old named Damien. I honestly don't even know how to truly sum up the journey of an Alagille warrior. I don't know if there will ever be enough words to describe what it's like to hold your child in pain and not be able to help because no one even knows why he's hurting. To not know what the future holds for your sweet angel, or to hear your son ask, why does his body hate him? Last week we had to get labs, and my son was actually excited. He missed seeing his blood. He wondered how it was doing. This rare life is all he knows. In his mind, it's normal. His cousin, who's 3, asked him, why is he taking meds, and why so many? And he said, everyone takes meds. From day one, nothing was average. Even though I had never been pregnant before, I just knew I was long before I tested positive. At 3 months along, I finally tested, and I saw my baby. My now ex-husband and I kept the gender a secret. I never felt him move, but he was a happy, mellow, healthy baby through most of my pregnancy. At 36 weeks, he was evicted via a C-section. His weight was good, he was stable, but inside, his actual stomach was shrinking. It was time to come out. Other than that, all was well. He didn't have to stay in the NICU. He came home with us, even though he was 4 weeks preemie. I thought we were all clear. Our story is not typical of what I read or hear from families, but all of you know there isn't much typical about this life. We did not diagnose my son through jaundice, and his doctor didn't even believe my little failure to thrive baby had anything wrong. In her words, my son was fine. I was a first-time young adult mom who was overreacting, and she was going to prove me wrong. So she did the labs anyway. Well, guess what? The next day, they literally left a voicemail that they were going to call the police to come find me. His liver was far from okay, and we had to rush 2 hours to the nearest hospital on the spot. This would be our trend for the next 7.5 years. He developed granulomas and tested positive for interstitial granulomatous dermatitis. It didn't make sense, so they did nothing. We finally added our Alagille diagnosis, and all my worries of the unknown had some sort of answer. For now, that helped to know something. I wish I could say that's all it took. I've educated countless doctors, fought for a voice, and every ER hospital visit. I felt like a failure. No one knew how to help us. My child had a diagnosis, but an ever-growing list of symptoms not connected or aware of a cause. We were seen at our closest children's hospital in Alabama, and his pediatrician was through the research department of the hospital. Yet even then, his doctor had to let us go. I'm so sorry, they said. I've never had to have this conversation. Something else is wrong with him, and none of this is normal. We cannot in good conscience know that there are serious health issues and we just don't have the knowledge to solve. What does that mean when a research hospital has to tell you that? He needed meds, he needed a doctor, he needed answers, and his body at the time was literally falling apart. No one else would see him if they couldn't. I had already lost my marriage. I had to quit a career I was passionate about and an amazing income when I had him. I was a divorced, stay-at-home single mom, and now no one would even treat my son. He was accepted into a complex care program at Vanderbilt after searching for literally anything. Damon and I moved away from family, friends, and everything he knew 2 years ago, and we still don't have answers. At his current hospital, he has 26 doctors in his current care team and more diagnoses than we know what to do, and yet we don't have answers. Is it part of Alagille? Is it an addition to? There are so many opportunities for awareness and knowledge. And one month our lease is up, and I honestly have no clue where we will live this time or how I can even afford it. I know somehow God will provide. Until this moment, only 3 people knew that. I don't share it for attention, but if I'm going to talk to you all on this, I'm going to be 100% transparent and authentic. I once went an entire week without eating, only because the hospital didn't provide meals for parents, and they didn't offer anyone to sit with your child while you were there, and he wasn't allowed to leave the room with me. Most people don't think about that when they hear you're in the hospital. Most people don't think about the gas you spend to take your child an hour or even 2 hours away for therapy or appointments. Most people don't think of the meds out of pocket when insurance doesn't cover them. How it is practically impossible to have any sort of job around those appointments, the therapies, school. Don't forget the ability to be flexible when their health changes at any moment. Self-care is vital to this life, but most caregivers or patients barely have what they need, much less to spend on mental and emotional health. And it is a dark place, so thank you for sharing that. I don't share what I deal with people. I don't share my financial situation with others either. Most days, it feels easier to keep it to myself than to hear the comments from people that just don't get it. I've learned something, though. We don't always have the patience, the energy, or even the emotional strength to share. But until we do share, we will have to keep fighting for answers, fighting for awareness, fighting for resources, fighting for a doctor that even knows what the crap you're talking about. People need to hear the truth. They need to hear your struggles, as hard as it is. They need to hear our stories because we are the pieces that will lead to connecting them. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah and Stephanie, for sharing that story. I know it's not easy, but it's, everyone in this room needs to hear it. And Hannah, especially, this is a good, safe place. And there's so many people in this room that understand exactly what you're going through. So thank you both for sharing that. We're going to move into the survey slideshow if we can. Do we need a couple of minutes, Jeff? We good? Okay, good. And we're a little bit ahead of schedule, so that's a good thing. The survey is, we wanted to conduct a survey prior to this meeting of our families so we would have a good starting off point for what to talk about. This is not completely comprehensive. Again, I said earlier it was about 58 questions. A lot of those questions were open-ended, and so I spent a lot of time reading through those answers, and we would be here all day. But I hope that I've been able to capture most of it, and hopefully at the end of today we walk away being able to have that open dialogue. So let's go ahead and get started on these. There were over 50 families who completed the survey, and the topics that we included: misdiagnoses, medication concerns, symptoms, of course, genetic testing, clinical trial experience, care team, knowledge gap, the physicians that maybe have never heard of Alagille syndrome, like both of our moms talked about, research priorities as far as what the families consider priorities, and then daily life with Alagille syndrome, which I know is a super important topic for a lot of you in the room who are not families. Of the 61 patients that were represented, and there have been more in the past few days, only 2 of those received their diagnosis after age 7. 2 were in their 30s. And you can just see there the majority of patients represented, 74%, received their diagnosis before they turned 2. And then just in that bottom box down there, I just wanted you to see that we had just about an equal number of male and female patients represented. The survey also was, it's a patient survey, so if a family, if the mom or dad has Alagille syndrome and the child has Alagille syndrome, there are 2 surveys in there, so that way we could get a good representation. And then, of course, our adult warriors also took the survey. Was the patient misdiagnosed prior to the diagnosis of Alagille syndrome? 39% answered yes, that they were misdiagnosed. Biliary atresia was by far, the highest as far as percentage of what the misdiagnosis was. And then these are in order of what their percentages were. So neonatal hepatitis came next, congenital heart defect only, meaning, of course, Alagille syndrome so many times has a heart component, but these patients were diagnosed with a heart defect only. There were several that were diagnosed with PFIC first, a handful meningitis, again, pulmonary stenosis only. We know that kind of comes with the Alagille territory, but their doctors told them, that was all that they had wrong. There were 1 or 2 with Williams syndrome, and then, of course, molluscum, which, if you look at the pictures of molluscum, it does look very similar to xanthomas. Several just jaundice, which I know both of our moms know about that, and then anxiety, which is the one that is the most aggravating and upsetting to our families, because they just want to be taken seriously. And a lot of times, as Hannah mentioned, when it's a young mom and dad, especially a first-time mom and dad, they may not be able to communicate exactly what's going on, and sometimes it's hard to get those doctors to listen. So we're going to try to impact that. What led to the correct diagnosis? Meaning, what could have prevented it, and then what actually happened? Again, these are kind of in order. Genetic testing, the majority of patients ended up having genetic testing. Of course, liver biopsy goes along with that. Someone who did not dismiss the jaundice, meaning that family kept on and kept on and kept on talking to doctors until finally someone listened and said, okay, maybe this is not just jaundice. The right blood tests, again, with a rare disease, it's hard to know which blood tests does this child need, or which blood test does this person need. So finally finding someone that chose the right one. One mom, I finally found a doctor who would listen to me. Again, that's a common theme with our families. And it's not across the board, but because, of course, we have, clinicians in this room who do listen. And it's just education and more knowledge. And then translated information into other languages, which we have tried to do with some of our materials. And, how do you get information that we might know here in the U.S. or another country? How can you get that quickly disseminated so it can help other people? And again, that's another thing that we are going to try to tackle. Did the patient have genetic testing to confirm? Almost everyone did, or a very high percentage did have genetic testing. So on which gene was involved? I know this is a big topic for several investigators in the room today. JAG1, of course, is at the very, very top. A couple or a few with both, and then we did see a few of our families with neither. And we know that's a little higher than that number, and perhaps those families just didn't take this survey because we have identified several who have been told that they have neither mutation. Okay, did you feel genetic testing was important in rare disease? Why or why not? This was one of those open-ended questions, which was really fantastic. 100% of the people who answered this question said yes. So a couple of people skipped the question, but 100% of the people, 57, said yes, genetic testing is important. And then we asked them to say why or why not. Preventing misdiagnosis, all the same things that we're talking about. You've got that validation, assistance. So if you have that in your back pocket, our parents feel more empowered. They are taken seriously. The list just kind of goes on and on. Again, I've tried to summarize here just some of the things that our parents told us. A determining factor in which way to go for treatment. Without that correct diagnosis, a lot of our families spend all this time, months, maybe years, treating the wrong thing. So if they have the correct diagnosis, then of course they can treat it. It helps them to determine what their treatment option should be. Again, significantly, when speaking to doctors and colleagues, it helps that you've had that done because they listen to you more. I don't know if families in this room, I don't know which families, because this was anonymous, so I don't know which families in the room here today have or have not had their genetic testing done, but I hope to hear from them in the working groups on the importance of that genetic testing. And everyone will receive a copy of these slides when we finish here. I will email those out. Okay, does anyone else in the family have a clinical or genetic diagnosis of Alagille syndrome? If yes, please list all. So lots of immediate family members, and then it goes on down, but 58% of people, or 58 responded to this one, so there's still a couple missing, but you can see there that those percentages are not super high, and that's one question that you'll see in a little bit. Our parents are asking us, there's no one else in my family with this, so why do I have it, or why does my child have it? That's a common question. Nodding our heads over here. That's a common question that hopefully we can get some answers to from those in the room that know those answers and can help us piece the puzzle together. Does the patient take prescription medications? So yes, and I'm going to grab a microphone so I can come down there so I can see this a little bit better. Let me just grab a mic. All right, does the patient take prescription medications for Alagille syndrome? So yes, a huge percentage, they do take medications, prescription medications. Do you feel the current medications are effectively treating? A lot of patients said no. So 41%, almost 42% said no, that they don't feel the current medications are effective. And we're going to take that question in a little bit and try to find out, why that is. Is it because we are treating the wrong thing, or just haven't found the right medication, or what's the answer there? Our families, here's what they say about the medication and why it's not effective. Her liver is still deteriorating. Itching remains an issue. Vitamins are still deficient. Still significant itch, disruption of sleep, tired, lack of appetite. He continues to constantly itch. My son is still yellow and getting worse, still severely itchy, not gaining weight properly. The number of skin breaks because of itching has increased to levels we haven't seen previously. In addition, his quality and length of sleep is incredibly impacted. He is still beyond itchy 99.9% of the time. If the side effects of a new drug were more severe than your current treatment, but clinical evidence showed it would significantly improve your quality of life, would you take the new drug? So this was a very interesting question. Looks like 26% said they would be very likely to take it, even if the side effects were more severe. But when you come on down, unlikely and very unlikely, and even that center group that's maybe undecided, a portion of our families, what it's telling us is more side effects, it's just too much. On top of everything else that they're going through, they just can't take one more thing. We felt like this was just a really good question and really gave us some insight on what our families are thinking and feeling. We think we know them. We think we know all of you, but when you really ask a tough question, you get some good feedback. And again, it's only unlikely and very unlikely. That's only 9 people, but again, it tells us that they're just dealing with too much and they can't take on one more thing. Which of these would most impact your decision? They could select more than one. 75, almost 76% said the number and the severity of the side effects would impact their decision to try the drug. Evidence the drug would be helpful. Evidence, so someone else out there has had a good response to it. Cost is a big deal, 60%. Cost and whether it's covered by insurance. Insurance is not necessarily a research question, but we are going to look at that a little more in depth later because it's a question that we get, Roberta especially, almost every day, at least weekly. Why does insurance not cover vitamins? Why does insurance not cover the formula? That's the only nutrition my child is getting. Why is my insurance telling me that it is optional? Access to the drug, meaning if it's available where they live, was about 50%. Recommended by their physician, 26%. Whether the drug is taken as a pill, a liquid, or injection. So on some of the questions that we asked about clinical trial, that was a big thing of how the drug was taken. If the clinical trial, we asked if they were to change something about a future trial, and a lot of them said, it's the way that the drug is taken. Is it going to work for me and my child, or me or my family? Patient testimonies, again, that kind of ties back in with evidence the drug will work. This community right here, we have 9 support groups. I don't know where Roberta went. We have, 9 support groups, and our main one, which has thousands of people in it, our parents are constantly talking to one another. You can get on there and you can search just about anything, and you can read through where our families have talked about it before. They ask each other questions. They get not necessarily advice, but they get other people's experiences. And it's just families on there, and it's screened before we add new people. That way it's a really safe environment to ask questions. But they're talking back and forth. So patient testimonies is a big thing. And then how often the drug must be taken. That's not a high percentage, but it was on there. And again, that kind of ties back in with some of those questions about clinical trial and what works and doesn't work for their family. And if anyone has a question when I'm going through this, you're welcome to stop me because, again, this is not completely comprehensive. I can probably give a little more insight if there's something that just jumps out and you want to ask a question. Please feel free. We already talked about this a little bit today. Was the patient's physician knowledgeable about Alagille syndrome? 43% said no. But the good thing is 84% of those people said that their physician did try to become more knowledgeable. That was not always the case. As Hannah pointed out, some of our families do have to move. They have to relocate so they can find a care team that knows how to treat this disease and all the aspects of it, which gets more difficult the more things you add, the more components. If you have the heart component or other things, it just gets more complicated. And so it's hard to find that good care team. I am in Memphis, Tennessee, where Dr. Dennis Black is located, and he is on our medical advisory board, and so I've been able to spend a little bit of time with him because we're in the same city. And we had a family that reached out to us. It was just ironic. It was a Alagille thing. She reached out, and she was in Memphis, and her granddaughter, who she raises, has Alagille syndrome, and she has every single thing I've ever heard of anyone having with this disease. And she was at such a loss. She didn't understand why she had a team of 8 or 12 different doctors, and how do they talk to one another, and what do I do because this one says this and this one says this. So I was able to connect her with Dr. Black, which was it was incredible because he just has this way of explaining, whereas I couldn't, why all of these doctors, and even though we don't know, have all the answers yet, have all the puzzle pieces connected of why things are so connected to Alagille syndrome, at least he was able to give her some information, and so she feels a lot better, has made some changes in her care team, and is doing much better. But that's part of what we want to do, is to get to know everyone in this room and everyone connected who's working on either the research or the care of this disease, so we can help our families more. She wouldn't have known Dr. Black, so that's what we want to do, is connect and help our families as much as we can. This is a quote from one of the respondents. Even though our doctor tries to learn, I always feel more educated about ALGS. I'm the most knowledgeable person I know about ALGS, and it's extremely frustrating to have to always be my son's best advocate. As parents, of course, we love to advocate for our kids, but sometimes you do wish that someone else would advocate for you and maybe give you a little bit of a break. So daily life, how does Alagille syndrome affect your daily life? Disease symptoms, meaning itch and xanthomas and any kind of symptom that is directly connected, 86%. Uneducated, again, physicians, clinicians, pretty high, 54%, meaning they're spending their days feeling like they're spinning their wheels and not getting the answers that they need, and it's affecting them every day. When you can't go to bed at night with any answers, that's really hard as a parent. Also at 54% is depression and anxiety for self. That could be self, a parent who took this survey, or that could be self, a young adult who took the survey. And then that is followed by depression and anxiety of their child. So the self one, 54%, that's very high, and we knew that. We see that every day. Isolation and loneliness is also very high, 35, almost 36%. And our moms talked about that today too, the loneliness that you feel because rare disease, and we're all so spread out. So that's why something like this today is incredibly helpful to our families. Other, which we'll get to in just a second, and then bullying at school, 22%. And then there were a handful of people who chose suicidal thoughts, which is in conjunction, of course, with some of the other things. On those other responses, I just wanted to read to you some of what these parents wrote. And these are quotes directly from the survey. I constantly feel helpless. Nothing works for his itch, and he's miserable. Day-to-day management of appointments, tests, medication, insurance calls. Multiple diagnoses, so my child misses so much school and is now so far behind. I can't work because we have to travel too often for treatment. Lost wages because I have to care for my child around the clock. Exhaustion, fear, and worry about the future. Financial burdens and fighting with insurance. Everyone asks what's wrong with my son. Why is he yellow? Sleeplessness, the kids, the siblings, the parents. It affects the whole family, as most of you in this room know. Nutrition issues and medication side effects. And I can't explain what's happening to my son because I don't even know. This is what they deal with. This is daily life. So this is not just every now and then I get frustrated. This is daily life. This is every single day. It's what our families are dealing with. We asked our families to list their research priorities in order, excluding a cure, because I think that's what we all would like to see. Again, they put these in order, so the percentages are kind of hard to figure out. But treatment for itch was definitely the highest, the most selected of these, followed by treatment of other symptom, which we'll get to in just a second. Then closely followed behind that, research regarding integrated care of connected diseases or conditions, and then other. So definitely, the symptoms are something that that they are dealing with every single day, and itch, and then the other symptoms are the highest priorities. The other symptoms that they listed, and again, these are in order, xanthomas, the yellow teeth that we've heard about today, nutrition, absorption, and growth, especially with the feeding tubes, joint pain, treatment for high cholesterol, pulmonary stenosis, fragile bones, kidney disease, heart problems, treatment for better digestion, anemia, and depression. So again, these are research priorities that our families told us about. And that would be the yellow, that would be the purple, other symptoms. And then if they answered other, we had open-ended for them to just write out their answers. And I couldn't put all of them on here, but this is a good overview of what most families put. Reversing liver damage is a priority, of course. Improving the bile flow, impacting the malformation of the bile ducts. And these are direct quotes from our families. So this shows you, the knowledge that our warriors have, or our moms and dads have. Quality of life for both adult warriors and kids. Nutritional resources to avoid failure to thrive. What can we do? They're at that loss of not being able to have the answers. Weakened immune system. And what's interesting is both the caregiver and the child. So many people put that weakened immune system or something like that, low energy, or I get a lot of colds or whatever. And it's not just the patient, it's also the caregiver. We'll have later on this weekend Caring for the Caregiver Breakout, which is a fantastic session that we're going to have. I'm not sure which day, the rest of this weekend sometime. But caring for caregiver is not just Alagille syndrome. I mean, we all have some knowledge of that in our own life, whether we have other diseases in our life or conditions that we're aware of. So we can all come together in that session and in that breakout session and maybe kind of help each other with knowing some tips and some tricks to getting some good rest and not having your immune system compromised because of lack of sleep and just stress. Financial assistance is a very, very big topic for medications and other medical necessities. More focus on treating the disease rather than just the symptoms. Symptoms, of course, are every single day, and you get focused on that, but of course treating the disease itself is a very high priority. Prolonged life for my child. There's some things that I didn't put on here, some quotes that I would have to just call them desperate. What can you do to help my child live longer? Am I going to see my child get married? Things like that. It was a tough survey. And then survival, day-to-day survival as a parent, caregiver, and then the child's ability to fight the disease and survive. So survival means a lot of different things for our families. Do you feel you personally have a voice in Alagille syndrome research? This question did not make us very happy. 54% said no. They do not feel like they have a voice. And one parent said, "This survey is the most voice I've ever had." So we're going to try to change that. And I thank everyone in this room for being here to help us impact this and get that number way down. That's too many people to feel helpless and that they don't have a voice. And then we asked them, what would you like to ask researchers if you were sitting at the table with them? How close are we to reprogramming liver cells from non-bile duct cells into bile duct cells? With regard to xanthomas, is there anything we are seeing to improve the visibility and elimination of these deposits? Xanthomas is a very big issue. It's another very high priority for our families, because it's something that's seen as well as something that affects their kids every day, or adults. What can genetics do to help carriers have non-ALGS kids? What treatments can be provided for adults with ALGS? We're going to talk about adults later today. That's one of our topics for our working groups. Adults kind of, we don't focus on adult care as much as we should, so we want to focus on that. My husband and I are negative, so why does my son have the mutation? We all want to know that answer. How close are you from finding something that can open up or increase bile ducts? Why is there nothing to help all the connected conditions rather than just the liver? Why does it seem like research information is never made public or at least distributed to physicians? And that's something that someone mentioned earlier, one of our parents. How does that trickle down? The work that you all are doing, how do we get that into the hands of the physicians so they are educated when a parent walks in with a child with Alagille syndrome? How does that happen? How can we get a better stream of information going and close that knowledge gap? We are desperate for answers. What can we do to help advance your science? That's a huge question for us today. We will, when we get into our working groups, we know, the families know what they want to tell you all, but that's only a piece of the puzzle. Another piece is, what do you as investigators and scientists and researchers and pharmaceutical, and what do you need to know from our families to help impact what you're doing in research and care? So what can we do to help advance that? Are there any questions from any of the survey, or you want to go back to any of the slides? You're welcome to ask questions. We're ahead of time. I talk really fast. So are there any questions from anyone? Yes. Oh, wait. You can't talk unless you have a microphone. I've been told that. So I'm just going to come to you.
I was kind of curious because so many of the affected individuals talked about the itch, but then in terms of treatments and there was no discussion of alleviating the itch. So I was just curious about that.
That's a good question, and something that I would love for the families to inject here, but it's a question that we asked also, and I'm going to give you our summary, which is what we got after contacting families after this survey, is that itch is something that you just get used to having every single day. So, of course, it's a priority, but it's just your way of life, and it's all you know, and it's all your child knows. If any family member, yeah, oh yeah. Oh.
I think I was one of those families that put that it's not a priority for us simply because we are on the Lumina drug, and we do get the help, and I think there's a lot of families here that get that benefit.
David Piccoli from CHOP. I just wondered if you're ahead of time, do you want to have a couple of people stand up front and answer some of those questions? Yes. Half of them can be answered, half of them not yet. Okay. But you may as well do it when everyone's in the room and you have some breakout sessions for some of these things.
Let me check the time. I think we have 15 minutes, but let me make sure.
We can answer everything in 15 minutes.
I know you can. Yes, we have 15 minutes.
Do you want to go back to some of the slides?
Sure.
Kathy,
yeah.
Benita, someone else? I'm not going up there alone.
Yeah, which, okay, okay.
Somebody just shout out which questions you want answered.
I was curious if any of the researchers actually has a model that does itch. Because, so we work with a mouse model for Alagille syndrome, and we gotta have a mic.
Yeah, thank you. We're going to get those slides back up.
We do have a podium that has a mic too. Thank you. I was curious whether any of the researchers actually has a model that does itch. We work with mice, and we have a mouse model that has Alagille syndrome. So it's a mouse that has problems with the liver and with the heart, and it's small and it's yellow, but it doesn't itch. So we can't study it using this mouse model. So does anybody have an experimental model that we can use, was my question.
You can.
So most of the reason why the mouse doesn't itch is because of the combination of the bile acids in the mouse, so they're not as hydrophobic as human, so you don't get the buildup of the one that ends up in the
Phobic meaning hydrophobic, as
sorry.
opposed to everybody in this room
Yes.
hates them, which
Yes.
is also true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I know, but is there a model?
not yet.
I wonder if, I'm Kathy Looms from CHOP. Becky Wells at our place is using a mouse model with a humanized bile acids to study something else, and maybe crossing that in with your mouse would actually create an itchy mouse model of.
Do you know if that one itches though?
I think by itself it doesn't itch, but maybe if you, well, she's going to treat it with some other things that will. Yeah, yeah, she's going to give us treat it with the toxin to give it biliary atresia, which is another thing entirely. But maybe if you cross it in, it would be an itchy Alagille mouse.
I think one of the Fick mice is itchy. Yeah. No, just a side thing. All right, so who would like what question answered? Shout it out. Fierce warrior.
Let me come to you. Go long!
Yesterday, I heard a lot of talk of it seems everybody has a good understanding of the genetics and what's going on and all this, and everybody is working on these mouse models to develop drugs. On there, you said, when is treatment? When are these drugs coming out? When are these? How much longer are we going to wait till these? And I know it's a long process, and there's probably not a.
No, that's a great question, and there are probably at least 3 different parts of the answer. So we have had meds for itching really for 30, 40 years. None of them were ever really studied well in Alagille syndrome. There's been an evolution of what it takes to bring a drug to market. Some of the things that many of you are on, like maybe rifampin, is based on the teeniest little, oh my God, barely reliable study, probably was right. But because a lot of these meds have been around for a long time, there hasn't been the same level of study. There are a whole bunch of new strategies of medicines that are being studied now in very formal and FDA-approved, complicated ways, and I am sure that everyone in one part of this room would like everyone in the other part of the room to sign up for these drug trials, because no med can just be approved. It has to be studied, it has to be safe, and all those things. So I think there is a good future for these things, but a lot of, I would say that, and I'm sure I speak for the other, I was educated last night that I'm not allowed to call myself a gastroenterologist. I have to call myself a hepatologist while I'm here. But for the people who take a liver doctor as opposed to a GI doctor, but for the people who take care of a lot of patients, you need a mix of things. If you're not going to use a surgical approach, you need a mix of things, and there are different ways to use them, and patients are different. And it works for many. It definitely does not work for all. And the single, not saying anything most of you don't know, the single most important cause of suffering is the itching. And we now have, we're fully convinced that that itching then causes sleeplessness, family breakdown, all kinds of things that need better therapy. And maybe that better therapy for some patients is ileal exclusion or diversion. I think there's a whole session tomorrow on itching. Sometimes the answer is transplant. And I have to say that the youthful physicians in our group have convinced me. I trained more in the era where transplant was a little more fatal and a little more complicated, and transplant now is a good therapy. And one of the papers that Benita led, if you know that you're going to get a transplant in 5 years and you're 5 years old, you really maybe should just do it now, because the quality of life will be very likely to be very much better. There's a potential cost, and I think people talked about like the side effects of a med. We're always convincing families that the side effect of the disease is 10 times bigger than the theoretical side effect of a med, and it's a hard balance. And that's also true for transplant. I mean, there are clearly people who have a transplant, they have a big complication, and it's terrible, but that's a small percentage, and for the other percent, there's really good outcome. And I fully believe that when itching is unstoppable, transplant is a better quality of life and better quantity of life most of the time. Yeah.
I think a question was up there, but as a parent of a child with Alagille syndrome, what can we do, or how can we guide doctors whenever they say, oh, I've never heard of Alagille syndrome? I don't want to just tell them, well, you should try Googling it. Like, where can we, oh, here, look at this. Not just let me explain my child. How can we kind of help that?
Your point is very well taken, and it's unfortunate. If you said how many pediatric liver diseases do we have to deal with, and the answer is more than 200. And I think even like our own liver fellows, after 3 years of specific training, they're not great at all these diseases. I think, we commonly hand out, like, we'll be in an office visit and we'll say, your kid has kidney disease. They kind of missed that. So let's fix it here, but you don't live here. Here's the paper, Benita, Kevin Mayer's paper. Take it home, give it to your kidney doctor. They will look at it. It is a partnership. So that's a problem with all really rare diseases. We say like it's 1 in 30,000, but a lot of those are not very complicated cases. So, if your pediatrician says, I've been a pediatrician for 20 years and I've never seen this, statistics would say if that pediatrician could survive another 20 years, they would still never see one. So it's just very hard on them. And, it's like biliary atresia, probably show of hands, everybody heard about biliary atresia if your kid was less than 6 months old when you were diagnosed. Because biliary atresia, way, way common. Alagille, not common. And, if you haven't seen a lot of it, I think the big centers, they look and they go, if you have a big, happy baby who's jaundiced, and on the high end of the growth curve, and the stools are clay white, say that's probably biliary atresia. But on the way other end of the spectrum, a lot of the numbers look the same. The patients look different. I think a lot of times people who've seen a lot of this, can tell the difference. But I really believe that for rare diseases, you need to go to the place or a place that has seen 10 or 50. In England, they regionalized all of their liver care for a long time. And they said, basically, you have liver disease, you have to go to, this place in London or this place in Birmingham or, But it was a right idea because the people who were there, and physicians can work together. It's not a matter of, if you go somewhere else, your doctor is going to divorce you. You need boots on the ground. But I think it's impossible to really get every pediatrician and maybe even every gastroenterologist to really understand this disease. It's just so complicated. What you said, you just accumulate more and more complications and more things. But the people who've seen a ton of these say, yeah, and you should think about the thyroid too, because that's part of Alagille syndrome. It's not a surprise. But, for people who see 1 or 2 cases in their lifetime, they can't be an expert. I think most parents become experts more, certainly than their pediatrician, sometimes more than their other doctors. It's unfortunate, but it's, you saw Williams syndrome up there. There are people who are experts on Williams syndrome. It's not me, but I know who to send it to, and I would never take care of a Williams syndrome because they could do better, and I think a lot of physicians feel that way. They want the help. Another question?
Good morning. I want to ask a question on behalf of my daughter. Her son has also got Alagille syndrome, and she asked, I must find out how to increase the vitamin D level and calcium levels. Although he's getting the medication, it won't, despite all of the medication, the vitamin D level and the calcium levels don't improve.
So vitamin D, so all of the vitamin issues are really complicated, but let's stick with D. So vitamin D has, it's available in a lot of natural foods, but most of us don't eat a whole lot of it. And some things are supplemented, but they're supplemented with a form that has to be absorbed, and then it has to be activated. And so, you know, a normal person can get away with a couple hundred units of the regular kind of precursor vitamin D, and then they can handle it and manage it. And so some of our patients are on like 50,000 units of vitamin D, and they can't get that level up. So one, if they've gone through that sequence, and sometimes it's a very expensive sequence depending on what prep you're using and everything else, the kidney doctors use a different kind of vitamin D. And it's a prescription vitamin D, so it's probably covered by everybody's plan. You have to be a little more careful about it because you can get toxic if you're not paying attention to it. But it's a much better prep for the people who can't absorb. You heard, well, if the people in the scientific symposium yesterday, and that was really a heavy scientific symposium. If any family members made it to the end, God love you. That was great, because I thought my head was going to explode. No. But so think about calcitriol, which is like the fully active vitamin D hand grenade ready to go, but it commonly gets in and you can get up to better levels. But what Kathy said, when we do this bone density test, the DEXA test that she was talking about yesterday, there's like nobody that we see, and we've done 25,000, 30,000 DEXAs on different kids with chronic diseases. There's like nobody who has lower DEXAs than the really severe Alagille syndromes. They are so far off the curve. Benita.
Hi, I just wanted to add about the vitamin D. Are you not from North America? You're from South Africa? That's what I guess. So in the United States, you can't get this, but you can get it in Canada and you can get it in the UK, so you can check South Africa, and that's intramuscular vitamin D. So you can give it as an injection, and that's what we use sometimes in Canada, and you can give 100 or 150,000 units once every 3 months, and that helps some patients who can't absorb it orally, but it's not available in the States, but it is available outside. So just check that as well.
Yeah, and I think it's an excellent point. And also with vitamin K, which now the vitamin K, the cost of K was around when I was a fellow, which, as Kathy will tell you, is in the dark ages of everything. And it cost nothing. And now it costs a tremendous amount, and it's not covered by a lot of plans. But if your child is not clotting, you can get parenteral vitamin K shots. And you have to get them much more frequently than the D, but almost always you can get that covered with insurance. So there are a lot of things where there's a way to get things to happen, to get your Peptamen covered. I mean, there are ways to get that covered or ways to finesse it where you can do better. And sometimes social worker can help you, and sometimes a really killer letter, can help you. We're going to hear about Canada.
No.
Sorry, I just finished one thing about vitamins. I just want to make another plug for vitamins, and I have no financial advantage in telling you about that, but in North America, there is a preparation called Deckers. Who's heard of Deckers? Who's on Deckers? Some people are on Deckers. So Deckers is a multivitamin preparation that has been made for patients with cholestatic liver disease. So the old-style multivitamin preparations that we use, like Adex, isn't very good for liver disease. It has too much A. It doesn't have enough D. But this new one called Deckers, D-E-K-A-S, has been prepared for cholestatic liver disease, and it has less A, enough D, and it's very good. And it's more cost effective because instead of having to buy the individual ones, you can get one altogether. And we've had tremendous success with it. So I would ask your doctors about it. When you ask your doctors about it, tell your doctors about it, yeah. I would also ask that when you tell your doctors about it, there are 2 forms of Deckers that are available. One has been designed for cystic fibrosis, and one has been made for cholestatic liver disease. Please make sure they pick the right one, because I've had multiple colleagues put their patients on the wrong one. So just make sure you get the right one. But it's really good, and our families love it, and it's actually reduced our usage in Canada of intramuscular vitamin D because it's so effective. And the most important reason why our families like it, 2 reasons. One is because it's one thing that you have to give, as opposed to multiple different vitamin preparations, and it's more cost effective. So, and again, I don't get anything for giving you that message.
Hi, it's Marcia from Brazil. Sorry about my English. And it's a pleasure to know you, Benita, and you, Dr. Pickley. And I wanted to know about my son, that he's done a XI surgery when he was 10 days old. And I really want to know what's the consequence of it. And yeah, I know it's for you, Benita.
I mean, I think there have been a few small case series about the outcomes of Alagille syndrome liver disease after Kasai procedure. We believe that it probably worsens the outcomes overall. And these are small studies that we've done, and we will look at this now on a bigger case base now that we have bigger databases to do this. But it seems that if you match patients with a similar bilirubin level at the right age who have and have not had a Kasai, the rate of progression to transplant seems to be higher in the group of patients. Now, it's not perfect. I don't think it's a definitive answer. We also know, though, now, if we look at patients that have liver disease, significant liver disease when they're little, overall the rate to transplant seems to be higher than we thought anyway. So I wouldn't take it as extremely negative news. I think, though, that people have to be more watchful. You can't go back. You can't undo the Kasai, right? So I don't want to give you an overly negative, but I think the physician taking care of your son just has to be more vigilant and more careful and more thoughtful about the fact that this could progress, more likely progress to transplant. Okay? It doesn't change your outcomes after transplant, though. Your outcomes after transplant don't seem to be different if you've had a Kasai or not.
Yeah, I agree with that totally. And I think the one thing, I mean, we would sort of mea culpa even at our center. We have done Kasais on Alagille, and we have done Kasais on Alagille where we knew it was Alagille pre-op. So it's very hard for the surgeon to tell the difference between biliary atresia and Alagille. So in experienced centers, the goal is to keep the patient with Alagille out of the OR because the surgeon is doing something called a cholangiogram. How many people had their kid had a cholangiogram as part of the, yeah. So you're someone who made it to the OR, and many, many patients with Alagille have such small, hair-like, insignificant ducts pushing upwards, which is the high resistance circuit. So when they inject the dye into the gallbladder, it goes down, they put a big clamp on it, the duct goes like this, but stuff can't go up, and then they have to make the decision, we're going to do the Kasai, and then the pathologist on Tuesday morning says, you know what, this is Alagille syndrome. So I believe that sometimes it's a misdiagnosis, but sometimes these are also the cases that are the most severe liver cases. And while a Kasai does not do any good, these are patients who really had significant duct disease, in the inner part of the liver. And I think it's hard to say, but as Benita said, what's done is done. Make sure that going forward you do the best that you can.
No, sorry. I just wanted to add, a couple of things came up about families feeling that their doctors didn't instantly get to the diagnosis of Alagille syndrome, and many families went through this path of having it be thought that it was biliary atresia first. And a little bit in defense of those physicians, I just want to say that it's easy sometimes for myself and Dr. Piccoli and Dr. Looms and Dr. Rosenthal, who we know very well, because we sometimes meet you later in your journey, and we have much more information, and we get to say, oh, obviously this is Alagille syndrome. But we are sometimes in the situation when babies are very young, and it is difficult to differentiate between biliary atresia. And just like Dr. Piccoli at our center, we have done Kasai's as well. So we don't always get it right. So just because your doctor took you down the path of biliary atresia first, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not good at this, because it is really hard, and biliary atresia is much more common, and the Kasai procedure is time sensitive, so they do have to think about that first. So this is more for you to hopefully restore faith in some of your physicians who maybe took you down that path, because certainly I've taken patients down that path, Dr. Piccoli has, and when we meet you as a second opinion 6 months or 1 year down the line, and we say, oh, this is Alagille syndrome, it's easier because we met you later. So maybe it restores some of your faith in those physicians who thought that it was BA earlier.
Thank you. Yeah, you can just put it right there. We're going to go ahead and break for about 15 minutes. If you want to come back in here, there's some snacks out there. If you want to come back in here in just about 15 minutes, then we will hear from Dr. Huppert.